Hey there, gamers! Sorry I went away for 5 years. Long story short, my life circumstances changed back in 2019, and I had to move away from YouTube. And now they changed again, which let me come back and make this video. I might make longer videos like this one every once in a while from now on, but as far as my old analysis style content goes, I just can't really do that the way that I used to, even if part of me wants to. That said, while I want to take the opportunity presented by this video to do a bit of a channel update and let you all in on some of the reasons why I stopped posting, you already know that's not what the video is about. My relationship to this channel and Homestuck over the last few years is just a side subject I want to touch on, while discussing the landscape of Homestuck post-canon works, both official and fan-made, and why and how, exactly, I've fallen completely in love with the scene as it exists now. This list is not going to be ordered by quality or anything like that. Instead, we're going to move loosely from most canon, that is, stories most closely connected to Andrew Hussey's authorship as the person who originally wrote Homestuck, to least canon, that is, things created by fans and bearing no relationship to Wuppumpkin. This list is also not exhaustive. There are a lot of post-canon works I'm not going to touch on here for a variety of reasons. The most obvious one is Vast Error, which I need to catch up on despite the fact that it's now officially licensed by Homestuck as a discrete official branch of the franchise. Besides that, there are plenty that I just haven't read, or read so long ago I don't remember them too well. Crow Strider AU, Double Death of the Author, Act 8, Mr. Tambourine Man, the list goes on. I've had some engagement with and loved things about all of these at some point, so if the list of works I get into here doesn't satisfy you, hopefully you can enjoy the promise that there are even more works exploring Homestuck and what it means to the fandom out there than just what I happen to focus on here. This little collection just consists of things I was particularly struck by, that have stuck in my head more or less permanently as parts of how I see the Homestuck multiverse, or somehow changed my relationship to the text. My hope isn't that you'll absorb the stories I find special wholesale, but that you might be inspired to take a look around if you haven't already, and find stories that you find special or beautiful for reasons all your own. You can expect full, or at least substantial spoilers for every work listed here, and there's a table of content in the description so that you can skip around. Also, practically all of these stories are meant for adults. The post-canon space is not particularly designed for kids and teenagers, with a few exceptions. Viewer discretion is advised. That's enough preamble. Let's dive in. Okay, so it is August 10th at time of recording, and a lot has happened in Homestuck. Number 1, Fruity Rumpus has launched. This seems to be two things: a set of forums for Homestuck Beyond Canon and its associated properties, and also a website collecting a group of fan works that have been officially licensed by Homestuck. So these are things that are originally separate from Homestuck, but have been brought into the official fold and allowed to merchandise and monetize their stuff. I've seen some of them were actually already in this video, others I haven't even heard of before. So I'm excited by this, it's just more stuff to check out, but this video is already like 2 hours long, and I will never get it out if I try to add sections to all of these stories. Here they are for you to read. There's even a new official Homestuck Discord server, which is wild. Andrew's doing new MSP adventures like Jester Quest on there. And there's a fun little culture of new readers rereading the original Homestuck comic as it is re-released on the new website. It's been fun watching the new culture develop, and yeah, obviously I'm there, so maybe we will meet there if you join. The link to the Discord's in the description. Number 2, as I'm sure you've already heard, VivziePop, the creators of Hell of a Boss and Has Been Hotel, have announced a partnership with Homestuck, and they're going to do a Homestuck animated series, voiced by Toby Fox, no less. So that's exciting. It's easy to imagine that most of the audience that's going to engage with this video is going to be coming at it from a place of deep hurt with, and maybe even hate for, the epilogues. I'm under no illusion I could reach everybody who feels that way, but I think I stand the best chance of reaching the most of you if I meet you halfway, by being truly honest about how I feel. Which means I need you to understand just how badly the epilogues fucked me up, personally. Because they did. So while this section is about Psycholonials, we're going to meander a bit through epilogues territory on our way there. Out of everything I'm going to talk about today, Psycholonials is the work I engaged with most recently. I just finished it on April 24th of 2025, years after it came out. To be honest, there was a time after the epilogues where I was pretty sure I never wanted to read it, or anything by Andrew, ever again. That's not because I lost respect for Hussey as a writer or hated his work or anything. To put it simply, it was just because the epilogues hurt too much. They hit me in a really deep and personal place. Well, a lot of places, actually. I had entire friend circles explode over them. I lost a really new and special relationship over them. And there was the fact that I had thought the epilogues were going to take the form of a more fun and lighthearted Homestuck anime web cartoon type deal because of the Viz announcement, and had let myself fall into considerable debt doing Homestuck YouTube in the first place, expecting that I could recoup the loss once they came out and the fandom exploded in popularity as a result. Which, that sure isn't what happened. But none of these things are the epilogue's fault. I made plenty of my own mistakes that actually resulted in these consequences for me. Nobody asked me to make a grand prediction about how Homestuck's future was going to go and then base my financial life trajectory around it, for example. That's all on me. It's just that it happened because I believed in Homestuck so much. And more to the point, I needed to believe in Homestuck at all costs. For reasons I'll get into later. But the costs of that faith cashed in all at once, and I found myself falling apart from basically every angle. On top of all of that, there's just Dirk himself. I'm a gay man who grew up in an extremely isolated island environment and had a propensity for falling intensely in love with ambiguously straight boys who may or may not have ever loved me back, but who things never worked out with historically. Dirk and Jake together represented an extremely powerful escapist fantasy to me, and I related intensely to both. But between the two of them, Dirk was always the more intense mirror to my own lived experience. So between his suicide in the Candy timeline, and witnessing his fall into villainy, complemented by his vindictive breakup with Jake in the Meat timeline, which is in and of itself another big meandering suicide attempt, you might be able to imagine some of what I was feeling in the wake of the epilogues, especially when I have some of the same issues with depression and self-harm impulses that Dirk does. Barely anybody knows this because pretty much nobody watched those streams, but technically, the epilogues debuted on this channel. Me and Aisha and Pip and a bunch of other people associated with the original run of Homestuck Squared did a marathon stream where we read the whole thing over the span of like 3 whole days. We raised like $5,000 for the Transgender Law Center by doing that. Andrew Hussey was in the audience and donated to it. We had freaking Dante Bosco as a guest star for a chapter. He read John as Dave and Karkat's gay officiator. It was one of the most delightful series of days that I've ever experienced in my life. I wouldn't trade those moments for anything. And I felt like we were all so alive and excited with the spirit of camaraderie that the event inspired. It's one of the things that I'm most proud of having done ever. Period. But that stream was also the very first time that I read the epilogues. And the entire time that I was watching the story unfold, I could feel this seed in me growing of just like relating to Dirk and relating too much to the political situation, which is another thing we'll get to pretty soon, and just wanting to die. Like, there is a very real sense in which the epilogues just made me want to die. And as soon as the stream was over, that hit me like a truck. And I just had to deal with that feeling for years after the fact. And ultimately, it was the feeling that pushed me out of the fandom and out of doing this YouTube channel, along with a bunch of other life circumstances. It wasn't just feeling really dramatic about a fantasy web novel, but it had an impact. And it wasn't just the text of the epilogues itself either, it was the fandom too. Particularly the way it would go on to talk about Dirk for the next few years. The way the fandom treated his suicidal ideation, his relationship to manhood and gayness, none of which the fandom had honestly been great about even before the epilogues hit, but obviously in the wake of the epilogues it got a lot worse. And I was struggling to keep a healthy distance between myself as a Homestuck and just like a regular person. And existing in the Homestuck fandom very quickly became desperately suffocating. And the final nail in my coffin is that given that I was such a prominent voice for positivity for Homestuck up until the moment they came out, and that I was immediately trusted with being one of the people who continued them in Homestuck Squared, I just didn't feel comfortable using my platform to say anything critical about the epilogues, especially in the context of the intense negative backlash and harassment that followed from the fandom as soon as they came out. I didn't want to add to the environment that wanted to write off the future of Homestuck. Again, for reasons that will become clear, I needed to believe that future could still happen. To be honest, even now I feel really weird and hesitant about admitting I was hurt by the epilogues as a story like this. It feels like I'm potentially letting down people that I really respect, maybe even hurting them by admitting this. But I feel like it's all important context to how I'm approaching Psycholonials, because that very distance between the me who was Taz, a real person, a regular fan of Homestuck just like everybody else who found himself blindsided by the epilogues and everything that was in them, and the me who was Optimistic Duelist, a prominent YouTuber known for finding readings of Homestuck that found meaning and value in the parts of it that everybody got mad at specifically, and who took a special pride and self-worth in blowing people's minds about Homestuck being good actually, but now found himself faced with the need to keep performing that role publicly, even though he was actually really conflicted and confused and sad. That tension, that distance, that division between those two people and the catastrophic consequences that dissonance had on my psychology is exactly what Psycholonials is about at its core. The sense of having to knowingly perform a role that isn't the truth, or at least isn't entirely the truth. The mental reality of being an actor, a person in reality somehow displaced from the truth of your inner self, of someone who feels alienated from the world, from themselves. All the world's a stage, and all of us are actors. Or, another way to put it, all the world's a circus, and all of us are clowns. Psycholonials is a story about that sort of thing, and other kinds of rage, as in the aspect. And I know this is a weird place to start this video, since while Psycholonials is the work Andrew released after the epilogues, it is not actually directly about Homestuck as a story in any real way, much less a story that has anything directly to do with classspects. It is instead a story set in a rough parallel of the real world, specifically during the COVID lockdown years. While fantastical by the end, it starts off firmly grounded in reality, Psycholonials is about Hussey's relationship to the incredible social weight and pressure that comes with having made something as popular as Homestuck to begin with, the shocking toxicity that can come with making a social media influencer out of yourself. Which, as you now have the context to know, I found myself relating to quite a bit myself. It's also the other side of the coin to the epilogues. I think the epilogues were about enabling Hussey's breakup with the fandom, in much the same way they were about Dirk's breakup with Jake in Meat. Dirk, as the author insert, is in fact the driving force of that breakup, burning bridges with the fandom left and right through a variety of metatextual means. And if the fandom is left wondering why all of that was necessary, why Hussey couldn't just pull away from the fandom and leave us with Homestuck's original ending, then Psycholonials holds that answer. It is a map detailing the emotional journey that eventually led to feeling like that conclusion was necessary. And while it's a painful one, it's also a kinder answer than most people think. For obvious and deeply understandable reasons, given the premise of Psycholonials and the tone of the epilogues, it's very easy to conclude that Hussey hates the Homestuck fandom completely and was motivated by spite or something like that. But while Psycholonials describes a relationship between author and fandom that can be deeply harrowing and terrifying, it also carries a vein of intense sincerity and gushing love. A love that yearns for healing and understanding, not just for Andrew themselves, but for everyone in the fandom too. Let's start by untangling the story of Psycholonials' main character from the life of the real-world Andrew. It's easy to blur the lines between them completely, but the relationship is fairly complicated. For starters, Psycholonials' main character is actually two distinct identities. There is Zen, a burnt-out, lonely, depressed 20-something girl who is angry about the COVID crisis, police brutality, the total collapse of the American dream, and how the fallout of that dream consumed the lives of her immigrant parents, who in their desperate despair then pushed all their misery and expectations onto her. She is also angry about people canceling her online, which comes across as just the cherry on top of her horrible reality. And then there is Z, the clown Sona she adopts to begin her Jubilite social media movement, who gradually takes over Zen's life until they've all but consumed her. In adopting the identity of Z publicly, Zen also adopts the identity of clown gender, which they describe as not caring about gender as something meaningful at all, and using any pronouns whatsoever. Coinciding with Psycholonials' release, Andrew would do the same. However, the similarities between Z and Andrew start to break down here. In her identity as Z, Zen grows increasingly toxic, manipulative, and disassociated from the way her actions affect people. They evoke Vriska quite strongly, to the point of exploiting a hapless incidental boy quite evocative of Tavros until thoroughly ruining his life. She outright kills people, both in service to their political agenda and for the crime of once having cancelled her and or being stalkers. She also, orchestrates the downfall of America itself through socialist clown revolution. This is both the first thing that rings true about the Z/Andrew parallel and the first thing that breaks the resonance. I am pretty sure Andrew did some things wrong over the course of their career presiding over Homestuck. I can say that because I lived the smallest fraction of a shadow of that kind of influence in the fandom, and it kind of broke my brain completely, leading me to treat many people who loved me horribly, and many people I barely knew more terribly still. The pressure of being notable in social media to any extent is just a deeply potent poison to the human brain, and it tends to bring out the worst in us sooner or later. But the exact extremes that Z goes to go well beyond the farcical. She's a complete cartoon character, an exaggerated manifestation of the worst possible vision of what clout and online celebrity can do to someone's morality. So extreme that basically anyone that can relate to the kind of problems they represent can engage with her story, reflect on their own bad actions as former influencers or YouTubers or activists or whatever, and have the merciful consolation of getting to say, well, At least I'm not her. In this respect, Z is an extremely good clown. A performer whose actions entertain the audience with their sheer audacity, while allowing them to be both critical of her mistakes and also sympathizing with the problems that led to them. That's what any character is for, of course, but the clown framing is useful when discussing a story framed in a real-life setting, with a real-world analog, and about such a deeply parasocial kind of horror to boot. It helps depict the kind of drama that is difficult to put to words for former media influencers left traumatized by the experience of quote-unquote stardom, and difficult to understand for those in the audience who haven't lived something like it themselves. To quote Andrew's own words about Psycholonials, "In a personal sense, this story is an odd fusion of two allegories. It loosely correlates with my past experience of presiding over a big fandom and watching it spin out of control, using much more fantastical elements like revolution and global conquest as the backdrop. It's also an allegory for what I'm doing presently with Psycholonials. Z decides to launch a new brand and to rebrand her own image by making a clown Sona, and then roll out new content to the public as a way of turning the page on whatever she was up to before. This is basically what I did, and these two ideas mix together in the narrative. Andrew's past and present blur together in Psycholonials, the window into his experience additionally complicated by fearful delusions, or maybe just considerations, about the future. Outright fantasy elements akin to Spurb and Homestuck, and more factors still. Here's one important element of distance between Z and Andrew. Zen may be a hussy analog, but she's introduced to us as a former Homestuck fan. She grew up with the story, in fact, and this is important to the plot. Later in the story, Zen comes to realize that a clown trying to weasel her way into her inner circle called Joculine is actually a girl who grew up in the Homestuck fandom right alongside her and spent several years canceling her publicly on and off. Joculine is honestly really scary to me. Her infiltration involves a lot of being helpful to Z and effusive flattery, and at the same time she tries to insinuate herself between Zen and her only real friend, even going as far as killing that friend's parents, mostly just because she's in the way. She hates Z, and has for years, but she's also literally stalking her and trying to make herself the only person Zen can rely on by ousting her actual support network. Her interest comes off as almost romantically stalkerish. And it reminds me of the early days when we were running Homestuck Squared, when the anger and harassment was so bad that I found myself dealing with at least one weird little stalker of my own. And forget how worried I was about what my friends were dealing with. The fandom was relatively nice to me. I was the fuzzy soft boy, after all. Zen's final word on Joculine is surprisingly nuanced and empathetic, though. She tells us about it through a message in a bottle she leaves behind at the very end of the game, addressing the audience itself, and therefore the Homestuck fandom directly, years after they've left it all behind and committed to living peacefully and happily with their best friend Abby. She comes to a lot of conclusions in that bottled message. One thing she decides is that Joculine was honestly probably just a fellow Homestuck fan who developed some weird ideas about kismessitude and developed a hate-like fixation on her. That ultimately she was just trying to get the attention of a girl she kind of liked while having an abysmal way of going about it. And more. Zen concludes that Joculine was probably just the exact same sort of depressed, aimless, deeply lonely girl that she herself was. That in pursuing her so relentlessly and cruelly, all Joculine was trying to do was to somehow fill this void of emptiness inside herself that she just couldn't seem to reach any other way, which was the same exact emotional motivation that drove Zen to start the Jubilite movement in the first place. Sitting opposite to Joculine is the figure of Abby, Zen's best friend and love interest, the girl who uses her platform to help Zen kickstart the Jubilite movement to begin with. Abby gets into Jubilitism, aka Homestuck fandom, but only incidentally. She plays around in the space when it's fun, and then increasingly backs away as it becomes more negative and intense. She is the heart of the story, but she isn't really invested in Jubilitism/Homestuckism. What she's interested in is Zen. She stays because she's personal, private friends with the Homestuck fan turned famous content creator, even getting herself involved with her friend's creative pursuits. And she endures it all as that friendship ends up turning her into a target, getting her parents killed, getting her beloved horse killed, and even as the sheer chaos and intensity of it all drives Zen away from her more and more as she becomes increasingly consumed by the Z persona, when all Abby ever wanted in the first place was Zen's love. Abby, like Joculine chasing Z and Z founding the Jubilite movement, is really only motivated by a desire to fill this fundamental hole deep inside her heart, an aching emptiness that begs for some release. Abby just does it by trying to reach out to Zen with genuine love and connection in her heart. And thank fucking God, Zen eventually wakes up from the influencer nightmare and answers her. Psycholonials is, among other things, the best romance story Hussey's ever written. If only for the fact that it's the only one to have actual payoff. All of Homestuck's core romances are pretty much just as good and retain Psycholonials' core theme of love being something that can lead people to hurt each other, especially when driven by the broken and evil forces of the outside world, but which can ultimately also redeem the world entirely and bring lives back from the brink of death and despair. It's just that Psycholonials is mercifully allowed to have an ending. In Homestuck, bringing about that conclusion, or choosing not to, has been left up to the fans. But by building these parallels between Zen, the fan-turned-content creator, Joculine, the fan-turned-harasser-stalker, and Abby, the incidental fan only here for friendship and fun, Hussey builds a wide umbrella of different kinds of Homestuck fan that can be imagined, and ultimately collapses the boundaries between creator, fan, and even hater/stalker completely by identifying them all as fundamentally people, finding themselves trying to fight the fundamental malaise of the human condition, or at least the human condition as defined by the real world we all find ourselves trapped in. Which is ultimately what Psycholonials is really about. There's this pattern to Z, this cycle or spiral that she's locked in that is ultimately the fuel of the meteoric rise of the Jubilite movement, and that is her rage itself. The events in the game kick off in earnest because of Zen's moment of impulsive fury when a cop shoots her, an unarmed woman holding a book. This commits her fully to pursuing the Jubilite agenda. The way she puts it to Abby, Zen considers the entire Jubilite movement an extension of her fight for sheer survival. It's self-defense against a police force that is empowered to commit brutality at any whim. Even being something of a monster yourself can be made somewhat justifiable if it's in the name of ripping the world free from their poisoned, rotting hands. This is why Vriska is a hero in Homestuck, while characters like Gamzee and Eridan are villains. While they all commit atrocious deeds, ultimately Vriska is trying to figure her way out past living in Lord English's system of power, or at least a way to die fighting trying to end it. Gamzee and Eridan fight in service to keeping that system of power going. In the same way, Z completely ruins Percy's life, ultimately getting him killed in a police shootout. But with his final breath, he dies fighting to protect her. Is it because Percy thinks Z is such a morally great person or whatever? Maybe. But that's only because the world order they're fighting against is so much fucking worse. This, then, is the first real reason the epilogues needed to be what they were. Homestuck has been a work of political commentary from the beginning, and the Candy timeline in particular is just a continuation of that fact. Candy Jane was an allegory for the first Trump presidency and all the cruelty towards minorities it inspired and enabled, and she was also just a continuation of the Condes's legacy on Alpha Earth in the original Homestuck, which described the gradual descent and fall of America as a country and human civilization in general. And now we're well into the second Trump presidency, which started off with Trump and Elon eerily mirroring the idea of the dual clown presidents from Homestuck, and ICE kidnapping protesters and citizens off the streets and deporting them to fucking concentration camps in El Salvador, jailing federal judges who dared to resist Trump's agenda, Doge breaking down systems of social welfare like Social Security, waging war on science as an American industry itself, systematically targeting trans people. It sure does feel like Brain Ghost Dirk might have been on the money when he said that 2024 was the last free election America would ever see. So Candy Jane had to exist because the problems that the original Homestuck described through the contest never went away. If anything, they've gotten worse. If Homestuck, now set on Candy Earth, was going to keep serving as a kind of mirror on what it feels like to live during the present times we exist in, then it needed to mirror the cultural poison that was already in our veins. But let's step back from the brink a little. I'm not saying that we are literally heading for a global apocalypse like Homestuck depicts. It would be more accurate to say that the arc of Alpha Earth in the original Homestuck may have reflected some of Andrew's paranoid and despairing imagination about what the political future of America could look like. And unfortunately, history has kind of vindicated them as being really, really on the money about it. But it's worth noting that if Candy Jane is the modern Trump allegory representing the problems we're currently facing, then in Homestuck Beyond Canon, she's already been defeated. Her arc of waging war against Earthsea's troll population is over, and now that comic is moving on into a brave new world. We'll come back to this later, but it's just to say, Homestuck is not just about presenting a dark mirror of our modern political horrors back to us. It's much more about confronting that darkness and then imagining ways to be free of it and move into the future. In fact, I can't even say that I can read Andrew's real feelings as a person through reading Homestuck and Psycholonials. It's not necessarily true that she viewed making Homestuck as a kind of political practice. What I can say for sure is that that's what I read into both of those stories, because that's what I was doing. Zen reminds me most of myself. I had a lot of fun along the way in this YouTube channel, entertaining people with ideas about class specs and stuff. But for me personally, that was always the goal and driving motivation. When I say that I needed to believe in Homestuck, what I mean is that what I saw in the fandom at the height of its popularity around 2011 to 13 was a kind of cultural chaos storm that ultimately centered on the celebration and exploration of LGBT identities and new and varied kinds of queer love. That's why so much of my work ended up revolving around the core romances of Homestuck and themes of love in the work in general. I truly believe that without the comics breaking ground for LGBT identities in popular media, we probably would never have gotten the modern wave of queer cartooning that we enjoyed in recent years. From Steven Universe to Adventure Time to The Owl House to She-Ra to so many more. I'm not saying the creative drive to present those kinds of stories wasn't there. I'm sure it was. I just think the corporate argument for those kinds of stories being able to be commercially successful with large audiences was probably greatly helped by the intense zeal for the bisexual trolls and their plucky LGBT human sidekicks that Homestuck's fandom represented to the world at large. At the very least, we wouldn't have gotten Undertale and Deltarune without Homestuck, and who can even say how many people Undertale helped awaken to their own inner empathy, to a leftist approach to politics and relationships, to their own LGBT identities. Between that and the number of people that Homestuck helped do the same, who then went on to make their own stories, nobody could ever really measure just how much of an impact Homestuck had on making our leftist culture what it is today. These were the kinds of thoughts that drove me as I started my YouTube channel in 2017, just as Trump was coming into office for the first time. I wanted that storm back, you see. I wanted to play at least a small role in making it rage stronger than ever before. I wanted to dream of a world where Homestuck and its characters became so ubiquitous and beloved that mainstream culture couldn't resist them, where Marvel and DC and Disney suddenly had to deal with the cultural weight of Homestuck's LGBT characters as serious competitors, where Homestuck became something akin to real adult American-born anime. where Homestuck creators, both official and fans, had the opportunity to be raking in furry artist amounts of money for their offerings. It all sounds kind of crazy, looking back, I realize that. But it also sounds a lot like Z's idea of Pranksis, the Jubilite call to action that imagines mixing social activism and organizing with clown-themed pranks. I was just more focused on the idea of intensifying fandom enthusiasm and passion. My hope and Zen's rage mirrored approaches to coping with the same fundamental problem. They drove us in similar ways and to similar places. What strikes me about Z's fury is that it waxes and wanes in cycles. How she spends periods relaxing with Abby or wallowing in slowly building paranoia and anger before something sets her off and puts her into a full manic explosion of anger or fear, leading her into making big decisions and moves based purely on instinct and emotion. To be honest, it's not that far off from the manic-depressive cycles that powered my creation of analysis videos and essays for most of my career. My creative highs were laced with that same kind of intense manic energy, just filtered through the lens of my ability to believe in Homestuck and desire to inspire that kind of faith in others, instead of Z's ability to stoke others' rage against America and its cruelties. Zen describes herself as someone who isn't really good at coming up with solutions, just with identifying the problems in reality and then ruthlessly destroying them completely. The only real solution she arrives at is that love is the answer, that finding love and giving it are the only ways to break from the cycle of infinite horror and suffering that comes with living in a broken world. I am someone who finds it very difficult to look at the problems in the world directly, but that conception of love as the answer came very naturally to me. All I could ever bring myself to really do was to try to imagine a world where everyone could love Homestuck like I did, if for only the simple reason that we're all suffering the same horrible curses of that lonely void in our souls and a world that does not care about us. Zen makes a point to say that although the love that saved her specifically, Abby's love, happened to be romantic, it would be a mistake to conclude that a single ridiculously committed romantic partner is the true fix for all of our fundamental human emptiness and pain. They instead emphasize the importance of realizing that love and friendship are likely already all around you, waiting to be noticed and appreciated if only you can focus your eyes on them. I had a lot of Abby's in my life over the course of my YouTube career. Most of those people I failed so completely that the bridges are now totally burnt. And if any of them happen to hear this, all I can say is, I'm sorry. I wish I'd been able to be better for you. I was also so incredibly lucky to have many Abbies who decided to stick around despite everything I put them through, and who have continued to be there for me even now. It's only because of those people that I'm even able to sit here speaking to you all in the first place. And for them, I feel all the love and gratitude in the world. I hope I'm doing better by those people now. At the end of Psycholonials, Z manifests before Zen as a godhead persona, having become a separate and wildly powerful entity that's completely taken on a life of its own. And they present Zen with a choice: the crown or the sword, to go back to the Jubilite movement after having already run away and assume the mantle of leadership once more, or to leave it all behind and stay with Abby in a life of happiness, accepting that the consequences of her choices will eventually find her like a sword of Damocles above her throat, no matter what the future brings. It is the most brilliant moment of meta-horror in the game, and maybe in any writing I've ever seen, when Z reveals that this choice is not actually Zen's to make. Z talks about how in being clown gender, Zen symbolically opens the door for any number of people to pile into the clown car of her personhood and identity, piggybacking off the you pronoun to ride along with her. She's talking about us, the players of Psycholonials, of course, and Z thinks this is their choice to make, not Zen's. And why wouldn't it be? It might be Zen's life and happiness at stake, but Zen's life is just entertainment to the audience, only a game that we're playing. Let's consider, in relation to this, Hussey's own status as clown gender. It's true that in a general sense, clown gender is just denoted as not caring about gender on the literal level, and sort of withdrawing from the gender binary entirely. But clownery itself implies an element of performing for an audience, the way Hussey played the role of ironic troll smartass to the Homestuck fandom. And now this reveal frames the decision to do so as something that opens you up to people piling onto your identity, piggybacking off of your personhood, insisting on having opinions about you, and not even just about whether and how you should continue performing on your platform, but ultimately how you should live your own fucking life, too. Because past a certain point, those two things become the same thing. Stop telling me what to think, Zen begs. This is the other vein of emotional logic running through Psycholonials that leads to the epilogues. The intense psychological pressure of trying to make decisions for yourself and what's best for your life while painfully aware that there's a functionally infinite horde of people out there watching you, waiting for you, all of whom with their own strong and mutually contradictory opinions on who you should be and what you should do, with no regard for your personhood beyond what you can provide for them as an artist. By writing the epilogues, Hussey gave the Homestuck fandom what it wanted one last time. A direct continuation of the story written specifically by him, precisely in a way that would decisively encourage the community to stop looking to her for all the answers and begin looking to themselves and each other for the answers as to what Homestuck really meant. Here's the thing about ending Homestuck. Both in the fiction of the universe and for the reality of the audience, making a quote-unquote perfect ending, or even an ending most fans would consider quote-unquote good, was probably always impossible. Let's imagine all those Psycholonial readers telling Zen whether to choose the crown or the sword, as instead being Homestuck readers telling Hussey, whether they'd like John Roxy or Callie Roxy to end up canon, or whether Dave Cat would be better off as a monogamous couple, or if they'd be better in a trio, whether it's John Dave Cat or Jade Dave Cat. Do you see the problem here? It's not that Homestuck's ending was always bound to disappoint some people, it's that it was always going to disappoint most of them, by virtue of the fact that there is such an immense variety in what the fandom wanted out of the ending, compared to the limiting reality of collapsing the potential of the ending into one discrete truth. And to a certain extent, narrowing the field of possibility like that wouldn't just betray the fandom, it would also betray the core metaphysics of Paradox Space as they were presented in the original comic. Paradox Space is meant to be a multiverse of limitless alternate possibilities that was only twisted into the shape of a narrative we could perceive by Lord English's Alpha timeline. Not only that, it's a multiverse built on the principle of Orin from the Never-Ending Story. The characters' wishes create their stories, and all their wishes come true. So, the epilogues pull a few tricks to set up a new quote-unquote official Homestuck story while still opening the possibility space for fandoms as much as possible, and leaving that window of possibility as open as it can manage. First is the two timelines conceit, which allows for different versions of characters' lives to play out in tandem, presenting us with different versions of the ways their dreams come true and are fulfilled. At the same time, the story leans into nearly the worst interpretation of the characters' problems imaginable, showing us how the characters get in their own ways, or actively corrupting or destroying their relationships with the people around them. As one example, let's consider the Dave Jade Cat dilemma. Fans largely considered the epilogues to be extremely mean-spirited to that ship in particular, especially when it came to Jade's characterization, and it was generally considered a complete mockery of the viability of that ship. But let's consider what the Homestuck Beyond Canon team has to say about Dave Jade Cat. Miles from the team says, "I think one of the saddest things about it is that if Jade had played her cards right, it's entirely possible that she could have had the Dave Cat throuple she always dreamed of. Unfortunately, she got too clingy and fumbled it. What a tragedy." To be clear, this just seems to be Miles' opinion. Other members of the team may feel differently. But I can say personally that when I was involved in Homestuck Squared, this is also pretty much how I regarded the problem with the dynamic. And I can hear you saying, well, neither I nor now the Homestuck Beyond Canon team were the epilogue writers or Hussey themselves. But well, The whole point of the epilogues was to present an intricate drama and then leave resolving that drama to fans like us. So, in the end, doesn't the truth of the fans who are actually continuing the story matter more than Andrew's, who is never going to tell us anyhow? He didn't even write the epilogues on her own either. Even that text had co-authors, meaning it was starting to dilute the meaning of who held the quote-unquote truth about Homestuck. So it's not that Jade Davecat is inherently impossible, let alone laughable. It's just that it doesn't come about in either candy or meat. At least not yet. It could still happen in the latter, I suppose. But even if it doesn't, the important thing is it could still happen somewhere, in some other timeline only limited by some fans' passion and creativity. The epilogues are a quote-unquote canon continuation of Homestuck, yes, and they're always going to be a kind of North Star for the fandom as an official work because of that. But the epilogues begin with an AO3 formatted list of tags, which is a visual cue that despite their authenticity in appearing on the official Homestuck website, they're also only able to be read following the same preamble of any fanfic on AO3, and intended to be thought of that way. I know a lot of people were angry about the fact that some of the tags were so ridiculous that it made them take other tags, i.e. suicide, less seriously, but that is also how AO3 works. Any fanfic author can do that, and many do. I also know the epilogues can't truly operate on a level equivalent to any given fanfic due to their nature as a work coming from the original author and legally and financially set apart by that fact. But that reflects bigger problems with copyright law and capitalism that Andrew, as a legal owner of Homestuck, can't really unilaterally fix, I don't think. So it still means something to me that the artistic intent is there. I take it seriously, and commit to finding every other story I'll be talking about here just as valid a continuation of Homestuck. The epilogues are also not canon in a way that in fiction rejects all alternate possibilities, the way the original Homestuck mostly was. The alpha timeline had voids one could fill out, and of course it was always possible to disregard the core story entirely, but I never found that idea very appealing, and if you want to play in the canon sandbox, there's always the rules laid out by Lord English to play by or work around. The epilogues don't have an alpha timeline. What sustains the narrative of the epilogues is a completely different kind of stakes. It's that Dirk has kidnapped Rose, and Rose is a character that everybody in the Homestuck fandom cares about, and so nothing can be alright in a continuity that doesn't have her happy and safe with Kanaya at the end. It's also the latent horror of the story's ending, representing for the characters a kind of death by cultural irrelevance in the eyes of the audience, which characters like Dirk and Rose seem to fear and actively reject, even as alternate Calliope in particular tries to impose that reality of nothingness onto them. It is not some kind of metaphysical obligation for the narrative to progress in any particular way, though. That approach actively encourages, even begs, fan authors to rise up and imagine alternate possibilities in the first place, because more timelines and fan works being produced that explore alternate possibilities means, ultimately, that the characters themselves are existing harder in the popular consciousness. This also kind of answers the question of exactly why the characters needed to be quite so miserable, flawed, and awful to begin with. In the words of a kindly clown grandmother we all know and love, to ascend, you must first always descend. And the epilogues represent a harrowing plummet straight into the center of a black hole. Every story I'm going to show you here, Homestuck Beyond Canon included, represents different imaginations of how the characters can claw and climb out of that abyss. Let's lean on the Beyond Canon crew's commentary a little more, and see what it can tell us about how the despair-inducing behavior Jade displays in the Candy timeline can ultimately be instructive and meaningful in how we think about her. Miles says, one of the defining features of Jade, going back to the original Homestuck, in my opinion, is Jade's scarcity psychology around interpersonal relationships, and it's this constant theme lurking just under the surface of anything she touches. To skip the big explanation, the basic point is that people who have been deprived of food, money, or essentially any resource, Jade's, for the record, is companionship, during pivotal developmental periods of their lives, tend to have erratic and overly covetous attitudes around whatever it is they lacked, even long after that need is more normally met in their life. We've said it a lot, but Jade is super lonely. People who develop this scarcity mentality will take drastic steps, hoarding, impulse buying, etc., to protect the resource they see as being in jeopardy, whether it actually is or not. And with Jade, this manifests as her continual social/sexual/relationship overreaching in an attempt to hold all of her loved ones as close to her as she can. Sort of makes you wonder what kind of parent she is. This is critical of Jade, for sure, but it's also very loving. It reckons with the reality of her trauma and horrific experiences in the original Homestuck that mirrors Dave and Dirk's rooftop conversation late in the comic, but which never quite got fully explored in the way Dave's abuse did. As a result of the epilogues in Homestuck Beyond Canon putting her flaws and the underlying reasons for them in the spotlight, Jade has become a richer, more fully realized character, even retroactively. This stuff was always there, of course. It's just easier now to look back and see it. There is one big difference between Hussey and Zen here, which is that Zen more or less just leaves Mizzlebip in charge of the Jubilites and allows the movement to destroy itself, even as it seems to succeed at conquering the world. That's not what really matters, since by then Zen has left and found happiness for herself. Unlike Zen, though, Hussey made an active effort to shepherd the future of Homestuck in a good direction, by entrusting the continuation of the epilogues to fans he felt she could trust, a direct and conscious passing of the torch that was at once an attempt to uplift the platform of marginalized artists. Even though it didn't work out as well as we all hoped it would on the first Homestuck Squared team, I still think that's really admirable, and I'm grateful for having had the opportunity. I'm really glad it seems to be working better for the Homestuck Beyond Canon team, too. At the end of Psycholonials, Zen reminisces on the Jubilite movement and concludes that they were ultimately right about everything. Right about the problems they saw in the world, right to try to do something about it, right about what they did along the way. Jubiliteism itself, and by analogy Homestuck itself, was not the problem, and Zen doesn't regret having created it. The real problem that drove them away from the movement was the simple fact that the very brokenness of our society, the social isolation and financial precarity that capitalism already causes, inherently incentivizes bad actors to get involved in any leftist movement, past a certain point of critical popularity, simply because rising to the top of social spheres in such movements gives people access to things like money, social capital, and power over others, all of which are alluring ways to fill that sick inner void of the heart that we keep coming back to in this essay. The hope of the epilogues, then, is twofold. To allow a select group of fans to continue Homestuck's quote-unquote official narrative with their own imaginations, expanding Homestuck's world with only Andrew's limited involvement, and to inspire the broader fandom into making yet more Homestucks all their own, even if only through sheer disappointment and anger. You might be inclined to tell me that even if that's true, it still wasn't worth it. That even with all this context, Homestuck was better off left standing still in the past. Before you commit to that conclusion, why don't we go see some of it together? This bold new world that exists after Homestuck. The serious business part of this video is over. Now let's have some real fun. Homestuck Beyond Canon. While it is true the epilogues fucked me up, it is also true that with only rare lapses into incoherent rage and despair, I always have and continue to stand by them as a worthwhile work with artistic merit, and even one that has a lot of love for Homestuck and its characters. I'm very proud of what I was able to contribute to Homestuck Squared while I was involved, and even when I had to leave the team, I felt only love and hope for what they'd be able to do without me. Those feelings have carried on to Homestuck Beyond Canon, too. For obvious reasons, I can't really talk openly about Homestuck Beyond Canon, especially when it comes to the run of the original team in Homestuck Squared. I was only part of that team very briefly, and my direct contributions to the comic are very limited. But I am still very proud of them. I like everything the team did in Homestuck Squared after I left too, but it's really up to the wider fandom to decide whether that stuff is good or not, and I consider myself too linked to its creation to be part of that conversation. My relationship to the Homestuck Beyond Canon team's continuation of our work is a little different though. First, because I have obviously never been involved with that creative team and don't know what they're planning. And second, because it was their version of the story, which has steadily surprised me more and more by deviating from what little I knew of where the story would go when I was involved, that brought me back to the fandom in the first place. To be clear, I can't exactly know how much of what brought me back was up to Homestuck Beyond Canon's team and how much was originally Homestuck Squared's script. Like I've said, I fell away from the project far more quickly than the rest of the Homestuck Squared team, and I don't know how the story script changed in the Homestuck Squared team's hands in my absence. I more or less completely fell out of touch with the team and Homestuck fandom in general after I left. To be honest, I couldn't even bring myself to look at Homestuck Squared for years afterward. Not because I disliked it or anything. It was about the shame I felt for myself for not being able to stay healthily involved. Like I let down both the fandom and, more importantly, my co-creators and friends. But I do know the exact update that brought me back happened during the Homestuck Beyond Canon run. It was this Dirk and Rose update on April 13th of 2024, which depicted Dirk's fears, vulnerabilities, and need for emotional connection with such sincerity and pathos that I started to believe I could trust this story with my heart again. I cannot stress enough. Maybe that scene started off being planned in Homestuck Squared for all I know. There's a kind of tragic beauty in the fact that I don't. I might have started off involved, but like the ship of Theseus that Dirk names his spaceship for, the authorship of Homestuck Squared Beyond Canon has changed so completely that none of the original people are still involved. The fact that Homestuck Squared Beyond Canon isn't the product of just one team of fans, but instead a kind of relay race between fans passing the torch onto each other, makes it something more born out of collective fandom love for the original story than any one singular group of fans. What I do know is that this team is the one that made that moment public, and so real as far as the fandom is concerned. Since then, there have been several beats that have continued to make me feel like Dirk's narrative in Homestuck Beyond Canon is going to be a satisfying one for me, including Candy John going off the deep end and concluding that the correct narrative move is to treat Ultimate Dirk like a simple villain and kill him, a position that literally everyone around him treats as misguided and ridiculous. Along the way, they've also picked up and addressed many of the threads that have so angered the Homestuck fans disappointed by the epilogues in Homestuck Squared, and even old criticisms of original Homestuck in ways that are really interesting. So, in celebration of Act 1 of Homestuck Beyond Canon coming to a close, here's a short list of those threads I find the most interesting. 1. Candy Jake's arc has fully redeemed all of the abuse he was put through in the epilogues. In a beautiful series of updates, Candy Jake goes through an arc where he makes peace with the need to stop Candy Jane, processes his grief over Candy Dirk's death, and assumes full responsibility for his own life and his need to protect his son and loved ones, leaving his psychological reliance on Brain Ghost Dirk behind in the process. This allows him to consciously tap into his hope powers in the comic's first major flash, S-Break, where he protects everyone from Candy Jane's giant moon laser and proves himself a war hero instrumental to the defeat of his evil fascist wife. Hell of a way to announce your divorce, Jake. I am so proud of you. Not only does this make something empowering out of Jake's decades-long suffering arcs with abuse and exploitation and being taken advantage of. Since the Grandpa Harley days, Jake has been defined by a habit of escaping from and neglecting his family members, especially his children and anyone dependent on him. It's basically Joey and Jude's entire lives. It's Grandpa having a tea party while Jade is playing with flintlock pistols that are fully loaded, almost shooting herself and ending up killing him instead. It's literally the fatal flaw that kills him in the beta timeline, and it's a karmic razor's edge that Meet Jake is also walking. Late into the Meet epilogues, Dave casually reveals that a woman sprung up on stage after Jake's speech and announced that he was dodging child support for the 3 children they had out of wedlock. And for Jake, this is an incredibly believable problem to end up having. So the fact that Candy Jake has actively grown and improved from those fundamental problems, specifically as a result of embracing his responsibility to his only son, represents a profound change in the direction of his story, both for him as a person living his own life and for Jake as a character, and to an extent, even as an expansion of how important pages are allowed to be and how much they're allowed to develop as people in the context of canonical Homestuck. It's a paradigm shift that tells me that these characters really aren't going to stay frozen inside the prisons of their own flaws. Homestuck Beyond Canon is interested in showing us how they change and grow and legitimately move forward. And speaking of paradigm shifts, number 2, Vriska got put in a time bubble for 8 years and got freaking therapy! Therapy where she apologized genuinely to Tavros and Aradia, where she dealt with her toxic relationships to Mindfang, Spider-Mom, and Doc Scratch, where she accepted and hugged her old pre-retcon ghost self, bonding over their shared desire to see Terezi again. The kind of character development that Vriska has gotten is something unimaginable to most of the Homestuck fandom as it existed historically. And now her primary role in the story isn't even to take charge and be the hero everyone needs. It is instead to look out for and serve as a guardian to these kids who will be the actual heroes of this new session of Spurb. Speaking of whom, 3. Yippie's name, a topic of massive fan criticism ever since it was revealed, has now been brought up in text as a toxic and manipulative, even potentially abusive, decision on Candy Jade's part specifically. Couple this with the way each of the Omega kids have been receiving name changes and nicknames, and it is easy to now read her name as an in-universe conflict point that will receive some kind of narrative resolution by the end. 4. Ever since the epilogues, we had some suggestions that Meet Calliope was in some way either writing the Candy timeline into existence or receiving visions about it. Now, they have compiled the entire text of the Candy timeline into a book and presented that book to Meet Karkat, specifically for his insight into how he thinks all the characters could start to heal and put their broken lives and relationships back together. Something they feel he should have a unique expertise in as a Knight of Blood. So it seems that Meet Karkat's arc will at least in part involve helping the Candy timeline improve, by acting as a kind of cross-dimensional writer/editor. This is a very fun way to give another set of characters power and influence that relate to the metatext of the story, like Dirk and Al's narration powers, or whatever the fuck Vriska's now capable of. Speaking of which, Meet Jane and Meet Jake have been retconned onto the Meet ship, and are now about to arrive in Deltritus. They were last seen in Catnapped, hanging out with Jaspros and receiving therapy of their own. As Jaspros puts it, Meet Jane's political opinions are still somewhat problematic, but somewhat better, and Meet Jake is still hung up and heartbroken over how Dirk left him in the epilogues. We don't exactly know who retconned them onto the ship. The leading theory seems to be that Vriska gained retcon powers with her narrative ascension to Hell Tier and did it herself. But Candy John glimpsed a vision of a far-off June Egbert just before this occurred, and since retcon powers can affect the timeline retroactively from at any point in the future, it could be the case that this is her handiwork and she is already here. The panel of Jaspers where she sees Jake and Jane off has a suspiciously breathy looking wisp of blue on it, and while that could be indicative of Vriska, it looks more like June to me. What matters is that Meet Jane is being set up to participate in a heroic arc of her own, now that her candy counterpart's villain arc is coming to a close, or at least a new phase. And Meet Jake is in a position to deal directly with Dirk again, confronting both the love for Dirk that the epilogues highlighted and the way Dirk ruthlessly hurt him in one fell swoop. Will he rise above his old love for Dirk and move past him completely, leaving Dirk behind after their relationship was irreparably violated? Will he chase his love for Dirk so completely that he abandons the rest of his allies and throws himself at Dirk's feet, becoming his pet muscle and candy boy? Or will he prove instrumental in bringing Dirk down, while ultimately forgiving him and trying to reignite their relationship? I don't know, but I do know whatever happens between them is going to be extremely yaoi, and I could not be more excited. Jake is a wild card that throws Dirk's plans into disarray, his biggest emotional weakness. Whoever put him there, having Meet Jake on the playing field of Deltritus and its burb game is a masterful move. And oh, did I mention? 6! We're finally here! There's going to be a new fucking Spurb session! Act 1 of Homestuck Beyond Canon is over, and in a few short months, Act 2 will begin, focusing squarely on the new players of Spurb, who will be members of either Rose's new species, Dirk's new species, or likely a mix of both, in combination with the 4 Omega kids. We've already seen one of these new aliens in a short pester log, in fact. We're talking about new aliens introduced, new class specs, new lands, a whole new kind of Spurb we've never even seen before. Finally, the true Homestuck begins here. All in all, it's an extremely interesting time to be reading Homestuck Beyond Canon. The Smuppet Show. Okay, here we fucking go. We are now dealing with stories made by other fans, not anyone involved with Homestuck on an official basis. The Smuppet Show, written by Laura Soros and produced, directed, and performed by Naked Bee and friends, is far and away the strongest and most immediately arresting work that has ever been made in Homestuck's playspace. This isn't to say that it surpasses Homestuck itself in writing, though it's definitely as well written. It's because The Smuppet Show is a feature-length Homestuck movie, making it probably the most accessible Homestuck story of all time. Basically, all Homestuck media requires a kind of extended commitment or active engagement. Reading the comic, playing the games, it's all very lean-in activities. It's fun, but it's also a kind of work. Even Naked Bee's prior video productions, Theater of Cruelty and Detective Pony, kind of get a little bit too cerebral to be something you can just enjoy on an aesthetic and emotional level and write out for fun, without having to work to keep up with them.
Anna unclipped the lead rope and let Acorn go free.
But really, is it even possible for a pony like Acorn to be free?
Acorn turned
into a lion
and ran across the paddock to the animal clinic. Anna ran after
the beast.
I know what's wrong, she thought. Acorn wants to see his cat friend. Anna
had never been more in love
with Acorn. Acorn, she said,
renounce your leonine form at once. Acorn did so, but only because he willed it. He was done obeying this tottering, immortal conglomerate of bone, flesh, and spirit that dared to call itself a girl.
There is a little bit of that in The Smuppet Show. It's inherent to the nature of a story with Dirk Strider in it. But for the most part, this is the first time Homestuck has existed so vividly as something that you can just lean back and watch.
The camera follows him as he walks past Barbie Dave in his director's chair, watching the chef bit on a monitor. Muppet Dave is sat in a second chair. He likes to pretend he's people.
The barrier for entry has never been lower. But to be fair, you do still need to be familiar with Homestuck and the epilogues to get what's going on. Set after the epilogues, The Smuppet Show is an in-fiction musical theater production borrowing from the actual Muppets that Ultimate Dirk produces and puts on for Terezi and Rosebud, who serve as both audience and hecklers, the Statler and Waldorf of the cast. Everyone else in the play also corresponds to a Muppet's character. Allegedly, Dirk is doing this out of boredom, because they have nothing better to do while they fly around on the Theseus, waiting for the plot to start. In reality, the story of the Smuppet Show is Dirk's meditation and processing on his relationship with Jake, and it goes to some pretty interesting places in that respect.
I loved being your friend. I loved being your friend too. And I think I loved you too. Don't do that. Don't overwrite what we had to make some kind of story. Well, who could I possibly have learned that from? Still, that's how it goes with us. Dirk, it's okay that you don't know where we stand. I never expected you to know it all, didn't you? Maybe I did. I fell for it. Fell for you, pretending to be so competent. I am competent. I liked when you weren't.
But it also speaks on the idea of love lost in more general terms, exploring the grief that comes with the loss of relationships and people we care about as it applies to Rose and Kanaya, to Terezi's feelings for Vriska and John, and to the relationship between Homestuck and the fandom itself in the wake of the epilogues. The immaculately performed songs may originally be from the Muppets, but they are recontextualized perfectly into the context of Homestuck's relationships, both those between the characters and the greater relationship between the text and the audience. I don't really want to spoil any of it because it's really very good and speaks perfectly well for itself, but I do want to talk about my favorite song in it a little, which is the very last one. Terezi makes a point during the show that she's willing to bail on the story Dirk is pouring his heart into because she doesn't care about his fake show or his fake feelings.
This isn't real. Do you want to bail? I'll bail with you. It's not like I care about his non-existent feelings or his weird projects.
But the final song in the credits is hers, and as she sings, she works on making a doll of her own, a Vriska doll to go with the Terezi doll that Dirk made in the first place. Despite herself, Terezi was inspired after all. The song itself is a loving meditation on Terezi's relationship to Vriska, her desire to see her again, and of Terezi's grief for the past of Homestuck when they were together, along with insecure wonderings as to whether they, and we, can do it all again. Put on the show, dazzle the audience, bring back the oohs and ahs and laughs that made us all fall in love with Homestuck in the first place. It rings extremely true to the insecure, yearning hope that drove Homestuck Squared, at least as it existed in my heart. I wonder if the Beyond Canon team would find themselves feeling the same way now. I wonder how many Homestuck fans writing their own stories, both ones on this list and off of it, would find their feelings mirrored in her voice.
Could we do it all again? Make 'em laugh like we did then. On the stage where we belong. We could harmonize for one more song. But I'm standing here instead. Now they're only pictures in my head.
I really hope you watch the show and find out how much love you have in your heart for these characters.
Oh God, why are you like this? Why does this work for me?
The babe with the power. Sure, okay, I guess, if I'm into it.
I hope it's enough that you decide to come back and try to see more of them too. If you do, I really do recommend checking out Naked B's other works. Theater of Cruelty is a little more cerebral and abstract, but it's a really good Dirk character piece, and it's an even shorter watch at around 25 minutes. Detective Pony the movie is substantially longer at about 12 episodes of varying lengths, but it's also fully animated, and it's one of those rare fan works that is so good that basically any fan that's actually experienced it automatically absorbs it as absolutely canon. If you don't remember Detective Pony, it's the book that Dirk rewrote for Jane for her birthday. We only really see the table of contents for that book in Homestuck proper, but Detective Pony the movie writes out the entire book, and it's incredible. It's some of the best Dirk characterization and the best characterization for any Homestuck character that exists. So do yourself a favor and watch it.
But here's the best part. That self-centeredness, it's compounded with self-loathing. So the more I talk about myself, the more I feel guilty, and that gets me off, which means I need to talk about it more just to prove how fucking selfish I am, which gives me further reason to hate myself, and so on, ad infinitum, ad nauseum. I make myself sick with it. Sick of it. I'm sick, and this book's a testament to that. I can't let Jane see this. That's the bottom line. This was supposed to be a gift, something about her, but I made it about me. It's masturbation, and she doesn't deserve that. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking about myself for one goddamn minute now. Jane deserves a better friend than me. Wait, fuck, there it is, within the first sentence. Me. Jane deserves better. She doesn't deserve to slog through all this horseshit, but if she, for some reason, despite my best efforts does, then she deserves an apology. Jane, I'm sorry. There.
And if you want more of the writing style in the Smuppet Show, the writer of the Smuppet Show, Lorosaurus, actually just released her first original novel. The Fool is a story about Leo, a third-born prince suddenly forced onto the throne after the death of his parents and brother. Thrust into the public limelight and dealing with a ridiculous amount of new responsibilities, the only people left that he can even sort of trust are his remaining siblings, who are all also dealing with grief after the loss of their family and with the abusive legacy of their kind of shitty parents. And because he doesn't have enough problems, he's also got to deal with the castle fool, whose job is literally to make fun of Leo, as the god empress who rules over all kingdoms in this world likes to use clowns to keep her kings in check. But unbeknownst to Leo, this particular clown might know and love him better than anyone else. That's right, this is King/Court Jester Yahweh. It made a clown fucker out of me, and I am here to tell you to read it so it can make a clown fucker out of you too. It's an incredible book that I was very lucky to get to read before its release, and I really hope you give it a shot because I want to live in the world where it does for clowns what the Locked Tomb did for necromancers. The Cookie Fish Timeline by Ender Slime and Windy Sea 3. Don't you sometimes wish Homestuck was a little more relaxing? Don't you wish you could enjoy the characters for a while without the high-stakes drama of it all? The life and death stakes and agony over shipping or whatever the angst of the day is about? Don't many of you wish, in fact, for the days when Dirk and Jane were just characters you were allowed to like and enjoy instead of bafflingly enormous assholes that drove the plot through their villainy? Enter the Cookie Fish Timeline, a mixed media series by Ender Slime and Windy Sea 3. Focused primarily on Dirk and Jane from an alternate timeline at the beginning, it consists of 2-hour-long videos right now. Jane and Dirk's bombastic baking bonanza, which involves our two mighty heroes baking some chocolate chip cookies while being harassed on stream by lovable characters like Jake, Dave, Roxy, and Caliborn in a fantastic showcase of live-action roleplay. Seriously, the characters are incredibly well acted and supremely believable, and their banter is funny as hell.
You don't have to read out the vulgar names, you can just acknowledge that they gave you money. Why would you even have that as a username? What are you doing? What are you doing? Come back here.
Hold on.
Well, anyway, you're going to want to mix the butter and the eggs enough so that they are not
David
chunky.
Elizabeth Strider. Change your username.
How do you even know that that's him?
The email connected to the dono. It was turntechgodhead@cmail.com. Also his IP address, but I'm not leaking that.
And Dirk Strider Takes You Fishing, in which Dirk takes us fishing. and takes us on a step-by-step explanation of the process and joys of this noble sport. Along the way, he also talks about himself a little and learns some valuable things. Both videos are, above all else, just a good time. Honestly, after all the miserable discourse, it's just so relaxing and wonderful to chill out with versions of these characters that are well written, their relationships so genuinely explored and depicted while leaving them recognizable as the noble and good, if flawed, people they were in original Homestuck. While the videos are good fluffy fun for characters that are sorely burdened by the karmic weight of Homestuck discourse, that isn't all they are. A friend described Cookie Fish to me as Epilogues Light, in that it's engaging with the epilogues and the implications of Candy Jane and Alt Dirk while remaining wholesome throughout, through the lens of these alt-timeline versions of themselves reflecting on their villain variants and relationships to the fandom. Late into Baking Bonanza, Jane delivers a heartfelt speech about how she exists in the fandom consciousness in relation to the rest of the cast.
It's okay, Dirk. I shouldn't get frustrated with you. You're a beginner. That's the point of the panel, is to teach beginners. I'm sorry, Dirk. There's no excuse. I'm a terrible friend.
You're not.
Well, that's what everyone thinks I am.
What do you mean?
I did my research before we started. People on this earth completely idolize us. You especially.
Why me, especially?
Well, you're complex, cool, well-written Dirk Strider. I'm angry, mean, evil Jane Crocker.
I don't think you're evil. I don't think I'm very cool or complex either.
I just wanted this panel to be perfect. I wanted to make a good impression on them and, I don't know, show them that I'm worth talking about. They're all incredible artists, you know? They always draw amazing things for your birthdays in December. And for mine, most of them just draw June. Or you guys. And only a few draw me. Which is fine, but we share a birthday, and we always celebrate it together, and...
Hey, it's alright.
In a comic set between the two videos, Dirk follows up on this by approaching Calliope with a copy of the Homestuck Epilogues he found and a question on his lips. He wants to know if it's canon, if Ultimate Dirk, with his greater fandom impact and media presence, is representative of a greater truth about Dirk than he is. Calliope responds with one of the best visual depictions of the nature of paradox space as it exists in post-canon yet, portraying the way that the death of the Alpha timeline allows for many true lives of characters like Jane to exist in parallel. While Dirk gets to express his anxieties and frustrations about his existence relative to Ultimate Dirk, Calliope closes on a potent reminder, to him and to us. It doesn't matter that the versions of Jane and Dirk in this video aren't the ones in the main comic. They're still living their own lives, and to those that read and believe in their story, they are just as real. All of this is by design on the part of Enderslime. In his own words, Cookie Fish is meant to be read in conjunction with the official post-canon, not as a replacement. The themes all go together. It's been pretty enlightening coming back to post-canon after 5 years of the pandemic, much older than I was when it came out. You get the sense you may have missed something, hating it at first, getting so angry at it, then growing up and understanding what post-canon was trying to tell me all along, that growing up is hard. It's hard and nobody understands. That's what post-canon is about. And also Cookie Fish. Growing up. My personal view is that the more Homestuck you view, the more alternate Homestucks you allow into your heart, the bigger paradox space and its inhabitants can grow in your heart, and the more nuanced and complex your views of them can become. I think that's really beautiful. Also really beautiful, all of the amazing merch Enderslime also does, just because this story wasn't awesome enough by itself. Check out these amazing captcha bags. Check out these 6 sweaters. If you can, get yourself some cool stuff while supporting this incredible artist so he can make more incredible Homestuck for us. As for Wendy C3, she does scoring work over at Podfiels, more on that later, and has a Bandcamp page, including her musical work on Cookie Fish as well as other projects. Whether you engage with that stuff or not, it would mean a lot to me if you let Cookie Fish, Jane, and Dirk into your heart. Cookie Fish is currently ongoing, with arcs for more characters to come. Elysiumstuck by iNets. Okay, this is my video, so you knew we weren't getting out of this without getting post-epilogues Dirk Jake, right? Sure, the Smuppet Show may already have been a full hour-and-a-half Dirk Jake-centric movie, but since it's told from Ultimate Dirk's perspective, it's only really about his feelings on the relationship. Jake himself doesn't really even show up, let alone have a say. Enter Elysiumstuck by iNets, an itch.io visual novel about Jake ascending to ultimate selfhood and narrator tier, intending to stop Ultimate Dirk and finally bring the story of Homestuck to a close. You, of course, play as Ultimate Dirk, trying to outmaneuver and stop him. Borrowing from the personality system of Disco Elysium, the game represents various aspects of Dirk's identity as discrete personas that speak their own thoughts inside his head. Which personas you emphasize, as well as the choices you make during dialogue with Jake, will ultimately net you one of 4 endings. Playing the game through to the end takes somewhere between 15 to maybe 45 minutes depending on how fast you read, so it's a breezy experience and pretty easy to get all of them. Every single line in this thing is an absolute hit, from Jake calling Dirk a lost little starbeam, to Dirk waxing poetic about how intensely and completely his love for Jake is woven into his very being, to Dirk completely corrupting Jake's mind and telling him to just wait there, pumpkin, to which Jake simply says, okay, yay. I love every single way the conflict between them plays out, no matter which one of them comes out victorious. And, for the record, nothing about Elysiumstuck is connected to Disco Elysium in any way besides the framing device. This is firmly an epilogue sequel, not a Disco Elysium-themed AU or anything, which means you won't be missing out if you haven't played Disco Elysium already. I haven't myself. I hope you check it out. And if you want more of iNat's work, her itch.io page has other games that she's made, including Elysiumstuck. This one also starring Dirk, but in an alternate universe setting where he's Dave and Rose's dad. It's also got top-notch writing and a blackjack-based conversation mechanic, so it's a really good time. I suggest checking it out. Godfeels by Sarah Zedig. Godfeels, I Dreamed of Feeling Better, is a fanfic written by Sarah Zedig and friends. Sarah being a YouTuber and writer for Terezi's PesterQuest route, which I recall as one of my favorites. Godfeels is not quite an epilogue sequel, instead playing out as an alternate timeline that branches off from the world of Earthsea before Dirk's plans are able to fully take off. The point of divergence is John, who ends up meeting a strange manifestation of his own gender that takes the form of Vriska, merging with her and becoming the story's version of June, which is very distinct from the way it seems June will exist in Homestuck beyond canon. The early part of the story deals with the chaos and trauma June deals with in the immediate aftermath of coming out, as many of the other gods find themselves confused, angry, and skeptical of the change, particularly due to its association with Vriska. In embracing a version of Vriska, what June is subconsciously incorporating is partly a willingness to actively make decisions for herself and her life to her utmost ability, in order to make herself happy. And June's utmost abilities include the power of retcon. This puts her into particular conflict with Dirk, who tries to get her under his control again to the point that he tries to physically hurt her to do so, nearly ends up killing Roxy before deciding not to, and actually does kill Terezi, Karkat, and Kanaya, who June then god tiers through retcon. This is an interesting point of divergence from the epilogues actually, in that while epilogues Dirk does a lot of terrible things to people, he operates as an emotional antagonist targeting feelings and relationships for the most part. He doesn't really try to physically harm anybody. Well, with the possible exception of John dying from Lord English's tooth, which we could interpret as Dirk killing John indirectly through his narrative description. This slightly bloodthirstier version of Dirk works for me, though, for 2 reasons. One is that the events of Godfeels feel like they're spinning wildly out of his control just as much as they are June's, and that if he felt like he had a choice, he probably wouldn't hurt Roxy at least, even if everybody else is fair game as collateral damage. The other is the simple fact that, like the epilogues existed to reflect certain kinds of real-world truths, so too does early Godfeels exist to explore the author's experience with transmisogynistic violence, and the very real experience many trans women go through of having all their friends and loved ones turn on them as soon as they transition. And Dirk is a character already set up to play an antagonist role in that kind of narrative. That said, the story of Godfeels is far bigger than this first conflict. June and Dirk both survive it, though neither comes out unscathed, and June eventually comes to heal and redefine her relationships with most of the characters who initially turn against her. The story also starts to expand into a full-on space opera with the introduction of Harbinger Silverbark, a version of Jade that has wandered paradox space for centuries, if not millennia, with Dave Petta at her side. Among other things, Godfeels has the most nuanced and fleshed out version of the Jade-Petta relationship I've ever seen in anything. And Jade may not be an ultimate self or a narrator, but she's so skilled, experienced, and powerful that it doesn't even matter. She makes stopping Dirk in his tracks look absolutely trivial, and that's not even her when she's showing off. June herself is a narrator-style ultimate self, though, and one fascinating thing Godfeels does with the I pronoun is delve into a psychological exploration of plural identity. June is her own person, narrator and body all her own, but the John and Vriska elements that combine to make her take on lives of her own in her psychology, and in the narrative as co-narrators, producing a unique take on a John Vrisk type of relationship, even as in the outside world, June finds herself entangled primarily with Terezi, but also at times with Rose and other characters too. There's also the enigmatic and horrifying eldritch cognitohazard monster Epigony, the antagonist of Godfeels. In no other Homestuck story have I seen a new antagonist introduced at a level of similar power and malice as Lord English at all, let alone so effectively. While I don't want to get into exactly what Epigony is and does, I can say that the consequences of its existence tear many of the cast relationships apart, as the relationship between the masses of Earthsea's people and the gods is forever altered, and many of the gods are driven into the furthest reaches of space. All of this, and I'm not even caught up on Godfeels, or even coming close to describing everything it has to offer. I think Godfeels is the fan continuation of Homestuck that best captures the feel of paradox space as an infinite landscape where everything and anything is possible, and the only promise is that change is inevitable. An incredible reality full of potential and adventure. If that interests you, check it out. Pumpkin Track by me. Immediately after Meet Jake is left behind by Dirk in the epilogues, he begins a conversation whose consequences will reverberate counterclockwise across paradox space for all eternity. So begins Pumpkin Track, my queer/spiritual comedy horror alternate epilogue sequel for followers of the Sufferer who like to get scared, feel hot, and dance all night long. Bring your headphones. Bring your fears and doubts. Bring the parts of you that want to believe in silly things, like prophecies and true love. Spanning 25 chapters and counting, Pumpkin Track is an ongoing, illustrated, full-color, hypertext novella series that imagines an alternate continuation of the epilogues that's meant to be read as a complementary timeline to Homestuck Beyond Canon's Meat and Candy lines. The origins of the title go back to the idea of a hypothetical pumpkin path, or pumpkin route. Pumpkin Path diverges from a choice Jake makes, though, not John, and takes a particular interest in exploring what can happen with as many characters reaching ultimate self as possible. Act 1 of the story, the Apocryphon of Jake English, follows his ascension to Ultimate Jake, his fight to derail Dirk's plans and take back their relationship. The most obvious parallel, then, is to INAT's Elysiumstuck, but our approaches to this basic premise play out radically differently from their very roots, which is to say, our conceptions of Ultimate Jake himself. For one thing, most of Act 1 of my story entails watching the process of Jake's ascension, which plays out as a series of surreal explorations of Homestuck's original plot, mythology, underlying philosophy, and metatextual metaphysics as I see them. But the biggest divergence is in his motivations. Mainly, it comes down to the fact that Elysiumstuck is a more contained story with a tighter narrative, and in service to that, Jake is of the opinion that he and everyone else are better off if the story is simply over. I come to the epilogues fundamentally differently. I think it's literally true that if the story isn't being witnessed by us, the Homestuck readers, the characters actually cease to exist. My view is that that's the core horror of the epilogues that motivates Dirk to action, backed up by the references to the nothing from the never-ending story in the vocal track The Leaving from the Homestuck Squared album.
You and I have been through this, have been through that, have been at ease. Nothing scares me more than God, and nothing cannot sustain.
Because of that, my Jake concludes that saving Dirk from himself necessarily means creating a narrative reality that he can participate in without dying. In service to that goal, Jake derails Dirk's plans to continue Homestuck, but then immediately usurps him, assuming the role of antagonist for himself in Act 2, which deals primarily with Meet Jade's desire for revenge and justice. The way this puts Jade into conflict with Jake ultimately proves to have cascading effects on her psyche that lead to her own ascension as Ultimate Jade, and the cast more or less keeps on ascending in sequence from there. A lot of Homestuck's cast have the potential to manifest in very alien, even eldritch ways when you really extrapolate the full potential of their selves, and it's honestly kind of funny that the epilogues gives us so much focus on Dirk, whose ultimate self is, by comparison, really just some guy, even if there's a lot of him. So this gradual cascade of everybody alt-selfing is an explicit goal for me. Partly because it's very easy to turn into an escalating progression of very anime transformation sequences, which owns, but also for thematic reasons. The idea of the ultimate self was the single element of the epilogues that enamored me most thoroughly, and examining its potential is a lot of what drew me to writing P-Track. That's because I think it opens the door to a kind of emotional catharsis that Homestuck has historically denied us over and over. For example, Jade is a character that's defined by waiting for a happy ending that never ever comes. She spends her childhood years alone waiting for a spur, which she thinks will give her everything, only for all of her hopes and dreams surrounding it to fall apart around her. She spends 3 years on the Golden Battleship, trying to emotionally connect to John and Dave Sprite in one timeline, only for John to descend into aggressive depression on and off, and Dave Sprite to outright break up with her. Simultaneously, in another, both of them die and she has to grieve them for 3 years all alone. She has a brief and memorable flirtation with Dave Petta and promptly never gets to see them again. She spends a whole life fighting for a better future that never comes as Grandma Jade before being murdered in her old age. In the epilogue, she pins her hopes for connection on Dave and Carcat, who commit to each other and push her out of their romantic dynamic in the Meet timeline. Dave quote-unquote commits to her and Candy, but is quietly uninvested and miserable in the relationship, ultimately abandoning her so completely he kills himself and leaves the timeline to do it. The single most interesting thing the ultimate self idea allows us to do, I think, is collapse all of these different versions of Jade, all of these overlapping experiences of grief and loneliness, into one single character's spectacular mental breakdown, begging for emotional and narrative empathy and catharsis. Then I get to imagine how to give that to her, and actually allow her to heal and begin to move on from all of that while still participating in the narrative. Now, just repeat that process for every other character, steadily moving the cast away from regarding themselves as people with superpowers and towards embracing themselves and each other as a true pantheon of gods who must collectively use and negotiate their powers to figure out how to perpetuate their narrative and reality constructively and responsibly. I think it's too easy to conclude that narrator tier power is inherently immoral and evil. I'd rather ask the question, what could this level of power and influence actually meaningfully, constructively be used for? With all of reality as their plaything, what could this assortment of broken, healing gods really do? That's an answer that I only really arrived at as I finally wrote Act 5, when Carcat's ascension surprised me by giving me the direction I'll be moving in Act 6 and onwards. But while I am basically writing this story just for me, there have been a handful of people along the way since I started writing it in 2019 who've cheered me on and done me the favor of beta reading it at various times along its production. So I want to take a second to thank Sarah Zedig, Storming the Ivory Tower, Etch Jetty, Ender Slime, Vox Symphonia, Profane, and Jenny Azoth, among others, for beta reading sections of it over the years. I also want to mention the Homestuck Fanfiction Authors Coalition in particular, a community made by authors for authors of fanfic as a space to engage with each other's work, give feedback on stories, and ultimately celebrate Homestuck fanfiction and its creations together. It's a community that welcomed me with open arms and proved very mature and considerate, discussing complex ideas, including those related to post-canon, where I got a lot of feedback on Pumpkin Track. You can find links to their Tumblr and Discord in the description. And particular thanks have to go to Lore Flaring K, who is pretty much the only reason this story finally made the jump from being trapped in my Google Docs for the most part to becoming a full-fledged MSPA fan adventure that I'm currently serially updating. Basically entirely because Flaring K already mostly had a code set up to transfer the HTML formatting made by Google into a format that MSPFA could natively import with relatively little work. Flaring K's also made a lot of other amazing tools for the Homestuck fan community, like the quadrant pairing animation creators, Quirk and Homestuck formatting text generators, and more. They actually updated the AO3 text formatting generator so that it can input text formatting much the way MSPFA does now. So that's a really good option for AO3-based authors who want to make text formatted color text in Homestuck style. Check their work out. Alternate Homestuck endings. Now we're moving away from explicit sequels to the epilogues in particular. These two stories are instead different flavors of sequel to original Homestuck itself, deviating from the timeline of the epilogues entirely. Burning Down the House. The first of these, Burning Down the House by Victoria Lacroix, explicitly acknowledges the epilogues and Homestuck Beyond canon, putting them into conversation with itself. In particular, one thing about it that immediately won me over completely and very predictably is the fact that it picks up on Homestuck Squared's references to revolutionary girl Utena and Sarazanmai from Dirk's room at the very beginning of the story. Specifically, Burning Down the House has Dirk display Sarazanmai proudly on one of his walls, while Rose can be seen watching Yurikumo Arashi, the 2015 show by the same director that did both of the previous shows. There are other elements of pure Tazbait too. The comic includes several references to popular MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV, which is one of my favorite games ever. And there's a fucking 7-round long strife battle between Dirk and Jake that ends in their romantic reconciliation. Jane and Jake actually talk about their relationship problems and move past their struggles to truly embrace each other as friends. It feels almost insanely decadent to me. Seriously, I'm eating like a king over here. Is this allowed? Burning Down the House also has some of the most intense ambitions of any of these stories in a formal sense, with several flashes and games, including one game that I am pretty sure is the single longest and most in-depth walk-around I've ever played. It focuses primarily on Jane Crocker and her growing relationship with a Terezi who is still grieving the loss of Vriska. But it covers the cast of Homestuck quite thoroughly, and it even seems primed to delve seriously into many of the characters left behind in the Dream Levels. It's certainly already doing wonders for many characters left behind in original Homestuck. In particular, Nepeta and Tavros get wonderful character development and an amazing flash. The things the comic does with web formatting also take the comic's historical play with the medium of the web page to new and beautiful extremes. And in the process, the story explores at least some elements adjacent to the idea of an ultimate Jane, though she hasn't gained explicit narrator powers or anything like that, yet, at least. It's been more about putting Jane in conversation with various aspects of her own splintered self, and coming into wholeness with all of them. I'm really excited to see where she goes from here, and where Burning Down the House goes in general. It's the most thoroughly fleshed out fan adventure sequel to the original Homestuck that's currently active, and you'd be missing out by not tuning in. Actomega. In a lot of ways, Actomega is the fan continuation that stays furthest away from the epilogues and closest to the heart of the original Homestuck. In this way, many might find it comforting and familiar, though it's no less creatively and thematically ambitious for it. It's familiar in another way, too, at least to me. Its author, Joyful Dreams, has been the primary video editor for this very YouTube channel for years. Even the videos I made myself, like this one, I got a ton of coaching from her for, and the quality of my work wouldn't have been half of what it became without her. So you were all already familiar with how good she is at what she does. On top of all that, Joy is one of the best and oldest friends I made in this fandom, and true to her name, she is one of the kindest and most delightful people I know. I've also ended up collaborating with Joy on certain pester logs in Actomega, though not very many of them, as well as helping with some brainstorming for its themes and outline. So my pitch here has as much to do with what I know the comic wants to become as it does with what it already has. But what it has is fucking awesome. In Actomega is some of the sweetest and most endearing art of Homestuck's relationships, particularly for Dirk Jake and Roxy Callie. It has my favorite depiction of alternate Calliope's existence in the wake of the black hole, one which stands in stark contrast to the way she exists in the epilogues and Homestuck Beyond Canon. It has philosophical discussions on the nature of the soul and paradox space and the connection between them. And it has a special love for Calliope, who I've always regarded as one of Homestuck's most underutilized characters, and I'm always happy to see more focus on, with an earnest message in its heart about the nature and value of fan work as a whole. Another character that takes primary focus in Actomega is Jane again! Yippee! And what stands out to me about her arc here is that it's in a very unique position to explore her morality, inner challenges, and potential for growth. The reason for this is simple. It forces Jane to confront the death of her dad, putting her in the same position as John and placing her in direct thematic conversation with Candy Jane. In the epilogues, the death of Candy Jane's dad represents a dark, intensifying turning point for her, her love and grief for him being channeled entirely into doubled-down bigotry and genocidal hatred against Trollkind. We don't know exactly how Jane will cope with Dad's death in Actomega, but the fact that she's in a position to at all makes her stand out as a Jane whose character will develop in a way that indirectly comments on her own worst potential, and I'm very excited to see what comes out of that someday. Check out Actomega if you're particularly nostalgic for what Homestuck was before the epilogues, while still being interested in stories that advance ideas related to them, or if you're just in the mood to experience some emotionally satisfying Homestuck magic in general. Joy has also been coordinating and publishing the Homestuck fan calendars, by the way. I buy them every year. Every single time they're a gorgeous and amazing collection of artworks from popular fan artists, and this year's looks to be no different. You can find the link for the Homestuck fan calendar in the description. Powerlove by Entropic Bias and Friends. Okay, so full disclosure, I came across Powerlove because I commissioned Entropic Bias for a couple of panels for Pumpkin Track, well after I finished writing this video. So this part is actually unscripted. I'm just doing this off the cuff. But I found the story so charming that I just had to include it. So this is also different from everything else on this list in that it's not actually related to Canon Homestuck or the epilogues at all. Powerlove is a choose-your-own-adventure Spurbless AU comic focused on your choice of either Dave Strider or Rose Lalonde going on dates with John Egbert and Kanaya Mariam, respectively. So it's a really simple story, but it's a lot of fun. The web formatting is really intriguing, and I like how the images and the text are mixed together. The character writing itself is really funny too, and I especially love the character animation when character animation comes up. These GIFs are just, there's something innately hysterical about them. And even on still frames, the body language and facial expressions are just really, really good. So yeah, this is just a really sweet and fun celebration of two classic Homestuck ships. At time of recording, Powerlove is mostly finished, but still ongoing. But considering how long it's probably going to take me to audio and video edit this, I wouldn't be surprised if by the time I actually publish this video, it's finished. Either way, I know at least some of the artists involved in Powerlove are very prolific outside of it. Entropic Bias does commissions, like I've mentioned, and does a great job of them. I'm not familiar with everyone else in the credits list, but I know that Hamsterdads does commissions on and off, and ran a very successful Tumblr and Twitter blog of extremely distinctive Homestuck art at Work Daily Log. So I absolutely suggest checking both of their arts out, considering them for commissions if you're interested, and if any of the other people involved have commissions or art blogs, I will have their links down in the description for you. So yeah, if these are ships that you're interested in, do yourself a favor and check Powerlove out. With that, our exploration of Homestuck's post-canon has come to an end for now. For our final category, we're going to talk about works that technically have nothing to do with Homestuck as a story directly. They are, however, authored by people who are or were Homestuck fans at one time, and tap into some ideas that are resonant with what the Homestuck Epilogues and Homestuck Beyond Canon are doing creatively. I call these post-Homestuck works. Undertale / Deltarune. Look, I'm gonna be honest, I'm including this here just to put it on the record and also exploit the YouTube algorithm. You don't need me to tell you what Undertale and Deltarune are. You probably don't even need me to tell you that Toby Fox literally made Undertale while hanging out in Andrew Hussey's basement. Undertale and Deltarune are as definitively post-Homestuck as fiction can get, and if you're a fan of either one, you're pretty much a Homestuck already, no matter how much you hate it. As it turns out, though, Toby Fox did release a statement on Homestuck and his relationship to it in the latest Undertale Deltarune fan letter. Here's what he has to say about it, since I think that'll speak louder than anything I could have to say myself.
If you haven't heard of Homestuck, it was this webcomic that basically launched my career. Back in 2010, I was a high school student with no aspirations for music composing at all. That was, until I discovered this webcomic, which I really liked. You see, the comic's animated sequences had music created by a team of very talented musicians, the Homestuck music team. I wanted nothing more than to be part of my beloved comic just like them. So one day, when a call was put out for additional musicians, I instantly took the opportunity to become a composer. I made some bad music, sent it over, and the author of the comic added me to the group. Well, I didn't want to waste the opportunity of being added, so I tried really hard to make as much music as I could, combining as many motifs as I could from other musicians. It was that experience which forged me into the composer I am today. Additionally, thanks to my association with the comic, I gained a following on social media, which really helped me when I made a Kickstarter for my game Undertale, you know, the thing that enabled me to make the game. I even initially reached out to Temmie specifically because of a Homestuck fanart she did on Tumblr, so I really owe a lot to Homestuck. It made me better at music, allowed me to make my game, connected me with many important friendships, and it taught me lessons on how to deal with fandom and the importance of valuing your fans. In my mind, it's basically a debt I might never be able to repay.
Kill 6 Billion Demons. Kill 6 Billion Demons by Orbital Dropkick started off as an adventure on the MSPA forums and evolved into its own webcomic. It's about a college girl from Las Vegas named Allison who gets dumped into a chaotic multiverse full of demons, aliens, and gods while looking for her kind of shitty boyfriend. Along the way, she becomes the supreme god of reality, gets 2 girlfriends, and kills a lot of demons, while toppling the 7 demiurgic god tyrants of the multiverse from their rotten thrones. It plays with a lot of the intense ideas about godhood and ultimate self that post-canon Homestuck does, but in a slightly less metatextual and more outright mythological way. Still, it shares themes like the multifaceted and paradoxical nature of identity, the need for true self-acceptance and embracing your potential for evil as well as your desire to do good, and what it means to exist in a reality that seems doomed by the malice of omnipotent manhood. It also has some of the most balls-to-the-walls, bananas gorgeous art and action you will ever see anywhere. I don't know how Orbital Dropkick does it without burning out, but I'm so grateful that he can because, oh my god, just look at this stuff. I don't even need to say anything coherent, the art just speaks for itself. Go read Kill 6 Billion Demons if you like having a good time, especially if you like killing God, and especially if you like messed up girl-girl romance. You will not regret it. Heaven Will Be Mine. Speaking of messed up girl-girl romance, We Know the Devil and Heaven Will Be Mine are visual novels made by Worst Girl Games, a small game studio of which one of the artists, Max Schwartz, has done Homestuck fan art and even once did track art for Homestuck Volume 8. I once did a video on We Know the Devil, their debut title, which you can go watch if you want to know more about that. Heaven Will Be Mine is We Know the Devil's more adult counterpart, a thematic sequel that follows grown-up characters Saturn, Pluto, and Lunaterra as they wage war in fantastical sci-fi fantasy ship selves that cannot kill each other, but only fight in a kind of intimate communication so perfect it begins to resemble something else entirely. I always planned to do a video focusing on it, and I guess this is my compromise. Heaven Will Be Mine has the best exploration of the idea of ultimate self as expressed by narrator powers I've ever seen in a story in execution. Because Heaven Will Be Mine uses these powers to pursue ideas related to romance, intimacy, and communication, it ends up being far more nuanced and imaginative than what Dirk and Al Calliope have done with their powers so far. Because those two characters can currently only really conceptualize those powers in terms of manipulation and domination. To be honest, it's a major aspirational influence on the way I write Alt Self in Pumpkin Track. I can only hope I write conversations and combat scenes half as interesting and erotic as this story does someday. Not to mention relationships halfway as romantic. Also like Homestuck, Heaven Will Be Mine is invested in escaping or undermining toxic systems that oppress queerness. Every Heaven Will Be Mine protagonist is a trans woman, and it depicts Earth and its cis-heteronormative culture as a kind of real metatextual and metaphysical force contextualized as gravity, weighing down the children of space with the culture of normality and attempting to drag them away from the freedom to exist in their own beautiful, powerful bodies back to being normal instead. It is, thankfully, also an extremely hopeful narrative, one that imagines love between queer people so powerful and flexible that it can create a happy future for them no matter what kind of ending they find themselves in. It's truly one of the most beautiful stories I've ever read, and I have a Homestuck AU about it in my head where Lunaterra is Terezi, Pluto is Pfeffery, and Saturn and her best friend Mercury translate into Vriska and Karkat as Morels, which is incredibly freaking funny. I need someone to play this so they can understand. Please tell me you understand. I've seen some of the developers talk about how they're trying to get a follow-up game off the ground too, so it'd be a good idea to throw them financial support at the moment if you can. I'm really excited to see what they do next. This last section is a shout out to a couple of YouTube channels that do streams or dubs of some of these stories, making them easier to engage with for people like me who sometimes struggle to sit down and read. Podfiels is a YouTube channel that exists specifically to podfic Godfeels. Not much else to say there. This is definitely going to be the way I catch up with Godfeels myself, now that I found it. Voff Dubs. This dubbing channel has covered a variety of works, including the epilogues and most of Homestuck Beyond Canon. It's the way that I caught back up to Homestuck Beyond Canon, for one thing, and it's also how I was exposed to a couple of really fantastic Homestuck fan adventures. I really recommend checking them out. Chamomile Gothic did streams for Psycholonials, does streams for Homestuck Beyond Canon as it updates, and is just about finished with a stream series for Heaven Will Be Mine. I know there are other Let's Reads for Heaven Will Be Mine in particular out there, but Chamomile has good line deliveries and commentaries, and also I know them personally and they're really cool. So, that's my recommendation. Sleepy Souls is a YouTube channel that did a dub series for Actomega that was really fantastic. So if you're interested in Actomega and want a YouTube way to go about it, there's that. And then there's Nezumi VA, a YouTuber who covers a variety of games for the most part, and once did a video on the epilogues themselves, but as far as I know hasn't interacted with any of the other stories mentioned in this video at time of writing. What she has done instead is do an extremely well voice-acted stream series of the visual novel series Umineko When They Cry, which has turned out to be a very influential story to Homestuck Beyond Canon, the comic having made several references to it so far. Honestly, I'm in love with Umineko on its own merits, so if you somehow wanted even more stuff to check out in this recommendation, here's one last thing for you as a treat. And honestly, even if you don't know much about Umineko, it might be worth checking out Nezumi's performance just because of the sheer range that she's able to pull off. Umineko has a cast rivaling Homestuck's, both in terms of size and in terms of how big the personalities involved can get. And it's amazing to watch her seamlessly blend together performances from a 9-year-old girl to her abusive mother to her abusive patriarch of a grandfather, all done live in front of an audience. It's a voice acting achievement unlike anything else I've ever seen. And it's one of the best stories I've ever read to boot. So there you go, check it out. Okay, I think I really got it all out of my system now. At least for right now anyway. Who knows, maybe someday I'll bring this video premise back with a whole new assortment of incredibly good fan creations. We'll simply have to see what the future brings. No, actually, I changed my mind. Before I let you guys go, I want to talk a bit about Stuck at Home Con. SAHCON was a yearly Homestuck convention that was carried out entirely online through streams and videos, organized through a combination of Discord and social media, mainly by directors Crow and Janaya Riley. It's been running for the last 5 years. It got started during the pandemic as a way of keeping Homestucks tied together when they couldn't go out to real-world cons, and it's been a real community bonfire for the fandom ever since. I was lucky enough to make friends with Crow when I participated in SAHCON the first couple of years, and though I drifted from the fandom in the interim, I've also been lucky enough to strike up a friendship with Janaya Riley and Ender Slime as I got involved in its orbit this year, which, as it turns out, is the final year that SAHCON is ever going to be put on. And while I was hoping to get this video out by 10/25 so that I could kind of promo SAHCON, that just didn't work out. And the convention is now over. It happened on 10/25, and the reason that I am talking about it now is because if you want to go see what else the Homestuck space has to offer, I would strongly suggest going and taking a look at everything it's had to offer over the years. This year alone featured trailers for 2 projects that I already talked about in this video, Powerlove and the new Rosemary-centric season of Cookie Fish Timeline. Naked Bee from the Smuppet Show put on a panel where she taught us how to make troll dolls out of Monster High dolls. She made a different panel about how to make Smuppets on a previous year. Voth did an in-character performance improv event. And there are just so many other cool projects that were barely even on my radar, like Alabaster the Doom Session, which I keep meaning to go check out even though it's by a friend of mine, Oasis Nadrama. Full games like Clout Chase, the social media dating simulator, or whatever exactly it is that X-Quest Fishing is, besides awesome, and really unique and exciting MS Paint fan adventures like Starstruck, The Squared Session, and My Moral is a Rainbow Drinker, plus many, many more. Over the years, there's been albums, raves, drag shows, teasers for Hive Swap Act 3, panels on obscure Homestuck subjects like rare ships and Damara Megiddo. That last one was of particular interest to me because I'm interested in writing Ultimate Damara pretty soon, and just so many other cool things. But above all else, what I wanted was to express my gratitude for just being allowed to be included in the atmosphere of SAHCON. I'm a really anxious person that struggles with talking to other people, even about things that I like, including Homestuck. I am very intense and I know it, but there has never been a point where anyone involved in SAHCON has made me feel less than or annoying or like I'm too much to be around. It's just always been really friendly and welcoming, and I've made a lot of friends just by existing in SAHCON's orbit and being able to talk to people through those social spheres. And as someone that is currently living life circumstances that are kind of inherently very isolating, even though I'm in a relatively good place in my life and really am quite lucky. It's just something that I really appreciate a lot. It's really meant a lot to me, especially this year. And so I really wanted to take the time to put it out to you, let you know that there's a lot of Homestuck to go through, even if you only want to go as far as one more YouTube channel to see what else is out there. And take the time to thank Crow, Yonaya, and everyone else involved in making SAHCON happen, just for the work they've done in cultivating such a positive atmosphere and fandom space, at a time when all of us can really use it. SAHCON is going to be deeply, deeply missed, and I do hope somebody, in some way, picks up and carries on their torch, even though I really can't imagine anyone making the event shine quite the way that they have. Thank you for everything, and I am really glad that sharing online spaces dedicated to loving Homestuck has meant that I've been lucky enough to get to know so many wonderful people. My world is bigger and brighter for having met each and every one of you, whether or not we've talked a hell of a lot. And I think that's true for a lot of people besides me, too. So yeah, thank you for everything, SAHCON. You deserve your roses. And with that, I think we are actually truly done. Thank you all for watching, and until the next time we meet, keep rising.
It's been a little bit since the last time we all talked. So how are all of you doing? I know that I have been a bit unkind to you all, and I'm trying to undo it. We thought this ended years ago, but it survived. I've forgotten far too often why I even recognize these faces that don't have names placed with them inside my hazy brain. But then there's too much to begin to touch on here. I'm pulled back once again, and I told myself I would not be on this adventure. But I'm haunted by all of these memories that I have of 4 kids and a game they play together. I burned the bridges thoroughly, but still everyone's trusting me again. And I should be relieved, but it happened so suddenly. And I know in my heart I haven't earned this, but everyone acts like my concern isn't a problem, like nothing is wrong with my very involvement. But I know how the song ends. I can't begin to list the times that I've walked along this road and concluded that nothing that I've done here will make sense in the end. But I find that kind of soothing. I pulled back once again, and I told myself I wouldn't be on this adventure. But I'm haunted by all of these
minutes.